Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fourth seminar for this semester for the unit PG 420, International and Regional Security. This week is week 5, and we'll continue on with our discussion on China as a security issue, or China as a threat. So as we've been discussing last week, and we've also extended the discussion in the Moodle Forum for week 4, we've talked about, or I challenge you to do your own analysis, decide whether you think China is a security threat to other states in the international system or not. So from your own perspective, as a Papua New Guinean, going through the literature that we assigned to you and your own readings via the media, international media, local media, you have to make a choice, or make a decision, decide whether you think China is, as positioned by certain Western scholars, China is a threat to countries within the international system and democratic countries. And some of us, we believe that China is not a threat. And you can see in the recent events in the Middle East, especially Iran, the war by Israel and US versus Iran. So if China was serious about security, then it would have joined Iran to aid them against the US and Israel. But whether it did help them or not, that's something for us to read further and find out. But you would like to see like physical manifestation of China sending its army to stand and support fight with Iran against the US and China. So there's US and Israel, but that's not being displayed at the moment in Iran. So that's something for us to consider. Is China a military threat? Is China a societal threat? Is China a threat to our economic security? These are things that we are trying to, through our discussion, we try to identify, look at, and make our own decisions. So to kick off the discussion, we will start off with group 7. Group 7 will be represented by Nina Mari and Twyla. Please go ahead, virtual microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Figueroa. We are presenting for Group 7 on the topic of mixed perception of Chinese economic activities in Papua New Guinea. On to our question or statement, Matbob discussed the mixed perception of Chinese economic activities in PNG. How do these perceptions shape public opinion about China's presence, and what role does this play in influencing PNG's foreign policy towards China? On to our introduction, Patrick Matbob's chapter on the growing tension with Chinese traders in PNG explore how the day-to-day presence of Chinese traders and investment intersect with local experiences, economic frustration, and political debates in PNG. He also situates this within PNG broader engagement with China, especially after joining the Belt and Road Initiative in 2018. So the mixed perceptions of Chinese economic activity, there are two negative perceptions, include many Chinese migrants are accused of bribing officials and illegally entering PNG. Some Chinese workers end up doing jobs reserved for Papua New Guineans, which cause resentment. media coverage of crimes and corruption involving Chinese traders create negative public perceptions. Also, projects like Ramonico cause dissatisfaction due to labor issues, environmental concerns, and reliance on Chinese labor rather than local workers. And lastly, cheap goods or counterfeit products and illegal trade linked to some Chinese businesses, which damage their reputation. For the positive perceptions, Chinese businesses provide employment for many Papua New Guineans. They supply cheap goods and consumer products across the country. Many locals admire the Chinese work ethic and business discipline, noting they work long hours. And Chinese investments bring infrastructures such as roads, stadiums, and conference centers. So how these perceptions shape public opinion? Number one, everyday interaction influences attitude. So most Papua New Guineans encounter China through small businesses or development projects. So this experience influence opinion through interaction with Chinese shop owners, employment in Chinese projects, media reports about corruption or crime, and local disputes over land and resources. Because people judge China based on what they see locally, public opinion becomes divided and complex. Another one is media influence. So PNG media plays a major role in shaping public opinion by highlighting corruption scandals involving Asian businessmen and political leaders. So these stories reinforce the idea that Chinese investors may be linked to corruption or exploitation.
Now, on to the second part of our question, how public perceptions influence PNG's foreign policy toward China. So the first one is government must balance China with other partners. PNG maintains a policy of friends to all and enemies to none. So this policy reflects public concerns about becoming too dependent on China. This is because some citizens worry about debt trap diplomacy, corruption, and loss of jobs. So the government tries to maintain relations with multiple partners, including Australia and other Western donors. The second one is domestic pressure for fairer investment deals. The 4 bullet points: growing public awareness means landowners, provincial leaders, and communities. These are challenging foreign investment agreements. This pressure pushes the government to review resource agreements, demand greater local benefits, and regulate foreign companies more strictly. An example would be Prime Minister James Marape's Take Back PNG agenda, which aims to ensure resource development benefits. This aims to ensure resource development benefits local people more. So public dissatisfaction with foreign investments include Chinese people help lead this policy direction. So to conclude, Chinese economic activities create both opportunities and tensions in PNG. Positive views include jobs, goods, and infrastructure. The negative reviews include corruption, competition, and governance issues. These mixed perceptions influence public opinion and approach to China in foreign policy. Our final message is that PNG must balance the benefits of Chinese investment with protecting local interests. Thank you, and these are our references.
Okay, thank you, Lina Marie, and thank you, Twyla, as well, for representing your group, Group 7. We also thank the group for sharing with us your answer and for adding to the discussion. If you have any questions or comments for them, you can share in our forum for this week, and they will give their responses accordingly. We now move on to the next group on the program. We have Group 6. Group 6 will be represented by Abigail and Lorraine. Lorraine and Abigail, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Yagira. So before we enter our assignment session, I will be briefly explaining the beginning statement, which reads, Szadziewski discusses the environmental and social implications of China's infrastructure projects under BRI. This statement, as clear as it is, warns that BRI projects in the Pacific region carry significant environmental and social risks if they are not properly aligned with the region's sustainability goals. He highlighted 4 concerns, and they are environmental destruction, land rights abuse, resource-intensive financing, and limited local capacity. So under environmental destruction, there is bigger roads, ports, and energy plants introduced, which can damage the natural habitats of coral reefs, mangroves, and forest habitats, undermining biodiversity and climate resilience goals. For example, Rennell Island in the Solomon Islands, where bauxite mining and shipping activities cause severe environmental damage. Australian Broadcasting Corporation, ABC 2019, reported a bulk carrier transporting bauxite ran aground on a coral reef, spilling fuel oil and damaging large areas of reef and lagoon ecosystems. This significant destruction of coral habitats and contamination of coastal waters, threatening fisheries that local communities rely on for food and livelihoods. So that is a clear example of how these projects can affect the environment. Under land rights abuse, it stresses on how customary land ownership in most Pacific states is threatened, meaning that projects often proceed without proper consultation, leading to disputes with locals and loss of cultural habitats. As we know, in many Pacific countries, more than 75% of land is under customary ownership, which often leads to disputes when development projects proceed without adequate consultation. Moving on to resource-intensive financing, which talks about loans that are received by countries with low economic flow, where it may result in countries being trapped in a debt cycle, limiting fiscal space for opportunities or better alternatives. For example, in Vanuatu, the government borrowed large loans from the Export-Import Bank of China to fund infrastructure, such as the Lugaville Wharf and road upgrades. White 2018 stressed that these loans significantly increased the country's external debt, with China becoming one of Vanuatu's largest creditors. Moving on to limited local capacity, that is the insufficient technical expertise and oversight can result in substandard construction, high emissions, and reduced lifespan of assets. For instance, Asian Development Bank 2020 stated that major projects such as the Port Moresby-Nadzap Highway rely heavily on foreign contractors, highlighting PNG's shortage of local technical expertise and oversight capacity. Now, to conclude that statement, although infrastructure projects can support development in the Pacific, they also pose risks. Environmental damage, rising debt, land rights concerns, and limited local expertise in projects. I now leave it to Abigail to answer the question. Sorry.
To answer the question, on how Pacific Island states they can ensure that such projects they adhere to the regional sustainability goals without compromising development needs. So first of all, we're going to look at the development needs of Pacific Island countries. So in Szadziewski's article that he wrote, said in the 1990s, traditional donors like Australia and United States, they gave aid with conditions such as privatization, non-liberal conditions. So basically about free markets and reform. So these policies, they harmed Pacific Island nations without adhering to their goals, sustainability goals. So as a result, this was a gateway for China to find new opportunities to increase its presence in the region, while Western concerns about China's were not always welcomed by Pacific governments. So because challenges of Pacific Island countries, they are more alternative, open to more alternative partners such as China's. They mainly focus at the Pacific Island countries' needs. So which they provided soft powers in terms of infrastructure aid and financing with fewer policy conditions to initiatives like the BRI, the Belt Road Initiatives. So we'll take a look at, for example, coming back to Papua New Guinea context, the mid-90s reform program. So around in 1994 to 1995, PNG faced financial crisis, which these are the effects of neoliberalism conditions, free market and privatization, trade liberalization, and all that. So because of that, it affected Papua New Guinea government in terms of economy. So PNG took loans from IMF, World Banks, and all that. So after that, that was a concern for PNG with other partners. So Pacific Island nations, so how can Pacific Island nations ensure these projects, they adhere to regional stability goals without compromising development needs? So Pacific Island countries, like Lorraine mentioned, they could development challenges such as infrastructure, climate, and domestic markets. These are some of the challenges they go through. So for external funding from China, it would be necessary because domestic resources are limited. Now, how can they protect themselves and their partners? Now, first of all, they would have to recognize the development needs for Pacific Islands for themselves, meaning they have to limit their infrastructure and the dependency. So climate change is it's a focus on, it's a need for them. So climate change is the only thing they should focus on instead of other infrastructural benefits. So initiatives like the BRI, it provided financial infrastructure, again, to what Lauren mentioned, some ports, roads, and energy systems. However, it's necessary because it is domestic resources are limited. However, rapid infrastructure development can also create environmental degradation, debt risk, social tensions if projects are not carefully managed. So it all comes back to recognizing what the development needs are and what should be focused on. Number 2 is to focus and strengthen environment and society safeguards. So Pacific Island governments, what they need to do is to ensure what Szadziewski mentioned was, for example, he mentioned about cable projects from Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands in the Pacific, developed by Huawei. So this goes back to, this goes back to also into infrastructure. So this would be linked with strengthening environmental and safeguards would be also linked to improved governance and transparency. So apart from protecting the environment and all that, transparency is really critical in terms of balancing development sustainability as well. So Szadziewski mentioned that the Huawei project on undersea cable. So it was a funded project by the US with $130 million project through 8 budgets. But critics, they argued that lack of transparency affected spending and overall development assistance in terms of priority. It was way higher than Pacific average in both Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea. So it's critical for Pacific Island countries to develop sustainability governments, to disclose agreements, which allows not only for the partners and to their parliament, but also to their partners, for example, the Pacific Island countries. So because strong institutions, they enrich infrastructure projects, it aligns with national development strategies for regional sustainability rather than being driven by foreign interests. So overall, and then lastly, to promote local participation and ownership. So this is another strategy that Pacific Island countries, they can use to consult landowners, because Pacific Islands, they most of the landowners, they and on the grassroots level, it lacks landowners. Landowners are not aware of the development taking place. Szadziewski also mentioned development in Papua New Guinea. So we look at China, in terms of China in PNG. So foreign interest on land, and we look at the casino that's in Chinatown, one of the projects that's been ongoing. So it's very important for landowner participation and ownership also. So local involvement, it will increase the likelihood that projects will support long-term development goals to provide assurance rather than short-term political and economic interests. So lastly, to conclude, Chinese, apart from traditional partners and China in the Pacific Island countries, they not only affect stakeholders, but they also affect countries with strategic interest to the Pacific. So BRI also has increased foreign attention and investment in the region, but it also benefits Pacific Island countries if well managed and if Pacific Island countries take ownership. However, depending on how effective governments they can manage these funds without transparency and anti-corruption measures, it will be difficult for Pacific Island countries to take ownership. So with that, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Abigail and Lorraine, for representing your group 6. We also thank Nina and Twyla for heading to our discussion. Now let's listen to group 3. Group 3 is represented by Delmay and Joseph. Please go ahead, group 3. Sorry, not group 3, group 4, group 4. Sorry, Delmay and Joseph, you are representing group 4. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Yagiora. So Joseph and I will be representing the group 4 to share our findings. Okay. Our statement question is, Wesley-Smith and Smith highlight the strategic dilemma faced by Pacific Island states in balancing relationship with China and traditional Western allies. Now the question is, how can these states navigate great power competition to avoid being drawn into security conflicts while maximizing development benefits? Now, before we answer that question, I will talk a little bit more on the statement, and Joseph is going to answer that question. Now, in the China alternative, Wesley-Smith and Smith discusses how the rise of China and the response of traditional Western partners such as the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and New Zealand, they have intensified geopolitical competition in the Pacific region. Now, this situation creates a strategic dilemma for Pacific Island states, which must balance the relationship with these major powers. So while this competition can bring development opportunities, it also risks drawing smaller states into broader security rivalries. Therefore, Pacific Island countries needs careful diplomatic strategies to protect their sovereignty while maximizing economic and development benefits. I will leave it on to Joseph to answer the questions.
Okay, so to answer the question, there are some ways that Pacific Island countries can use to avoid security conflicts with China and other Western countries. So, number one would be maintain balanced diplomacy. So, Pacific Island countries can avoid choosing sides by maintaining cooperative relationships with both China and Western countries. The second one would be leverage competition for development. Competition between major powers can be used to secure more aid, infrastructure projects, investment, and trade opportunities. The third one would be to promote regional unity, working collectively through organizations like the Pacific Islands Forum helps Pacific countries strengthen their bargaining power and shared regional priorities. The fourth one would be focus on Pacific priorities, emphasizing regional agendas such as climate change, sustainable development, and human security. Helps prevent the region from being dominated by external security rivals. The fifth one, the strengthen governance and oversight. Strong policies and transparency ensures that foreign investments from any partner support national development without undermining sovereignty. And the last one would be adopt a friends to all approach. By engaging openly with multiple partners rather than aligning with one power, Pacific countries can maintain independence with benefiting from diverse partnerships. And to conclude our presentation, the analysis by Wesley-Smith and Smith in the China Alternative highlights that Pacific Island states face a complex strategic environment shaped by growing competition between China and other traditional Western countries. So despite these pressures, Pacific countries are not powerless. They can use careful diplomacy and balanced engagement with multiple partners to avoid being drawn into security conflicts. Thank you.
That's the end of our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Delmi and Joseph, for your time and for sharing with us your group's answer to the assigned question. We now move on to group 4 to group 5. Group 5 will be represented by Simone and Joe. Group 5, please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. So Joe and I will be presenting on behalf of Group 5. Our question reads, according to Kabutaulaka, Pacific Island leaders have prioritized non-traditional security concerns like climate change over external military threats. How does this approach challenge the narratives of external powers, including China's strategic initiatives in the region? So I will be giving a brief recap or a brief introduction, and Joe will answer the questions. So in last week's session for Group 5, we learned that Kabutaulaka argued that Blue Pacific empowers Pacific Islands countries by giving them agency to frame and tell their stories and map their own spaces. The region, in the face of overwhelming global interest by powers who want to draw Oceania into their map, and agenda's Pacific leaders view climate change as the greatest security challenge. So I'll just define a few terms that will give context to the answers for our questions. Non-traditional security concerns refers to challenges needed for survival and well-being of people and states that arise from non-military challenges such as environmental degradation, economic crisis, and pandemics, and often transnational and require collaborative support rather than solely military responses. Next, external military threats. In the field of IR, this refers to potential danger and risks or likelihood of a state being targeted by another state or non-state actor with force, thereby breaching its sovereignty, territorial integrity, or security. For instance, the dispute regarding island sovereignty in the South China Sea, such as those between China, the Philippines, and Vietnam, representing ongoing military threats that prompt increased military expenditure and modernization of armed forces in the region. The next terms are the narratives of external powers. In IR, this refers to stories and/or strategic frameworks or ideas projected by powerful states to define the international order, legitimize their own foreign policy in order to influence the behavior of other actors and shape the perceptions of identity, according to Oxford Academy. And lastly, China's strategic initiatives. This refers to a set of grand, state-led, and comprehensive policies which Chinese President Xi Jinping designed to reshape global governance, strengthen China's geopolitical influence, and foster an alternative, non-Western centric world order and one China policy. The Belt and Road Initiative is one clear example of this. With that, Joe will answer the question.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I hope what Simon has mentioned in the backgrounds give you guys a good background understanding of what I'll be answering. So the second part of the statement is, how does this approach challenge the narrative of external powers, including China's strategic initiatives in the region? So the Blue Pacific narrative challenges dominant geopolitical narratives promoted by superpowers such as the United States, China, Australia, and so forth, by reframing how security and regional priorities are understood in the Pacific. Instead of accepting the external interpretations of the region as a strategic battleground, Pacific leaders are setting their own perspective on security, development, and regional cooperation. So we've identified key strategic approaches that prioritizes the interest of Pacific Island people under the Blue Pacific narrative. The first one is the shift away from traditional military security. A key way that the Blue Pacific narrative challenges external power perspective is by redefining what security means for the Pacific Island countries. Major powers often frame the Pacific in terms of military strategy and geopolitical rivalry. However, the Pacific Island leaders consistently highlight how non-traditional threats such as climate change, natural disasters, and human security as their most pressing concerns. This perspective is clearly articulated in the Bold Declaration of Regional Security, which was adopted by the Pacific Island Forum in 2018, which identifies climate change as the single most greatest threat to the livelihood, security, and well-being of Pacific Islanders. So by emphasizing environmental, and human security. Pacific states challenges the militarized security narratives often promoted by the external powers. Our second approach is the rejection of the idea that the Pacific is a strategic battleground. So the Blue Pacific framework also resists the portrayal of the region as a strategic competition between global powers, particularly between the Western countries, United States, the leader being United States and China. So the Pacific Island leaders have increasingly rejected the notion that their region should be treated as a geopolitical chessboard. Instead, the Pacific narrative, the Blue Pacific narrative promotes a form of countermapping where Pacific states redefine the region on their own terms. So Kabutaulaka 2021 states that this concept allows Pacific Island countries to withdraw the geopolitical map by emphasizing regional unity, ocean stewardship, and shared identity rather than external rivalries. The number 3 strategy is to place emphasis on Pacific agency. So the blue narrative is the emphasis on Pacific, places a huge emphasis on Pacific narrative. So historically, the Pacific Island countries have often been portrayed as a passive recipient of aid or influence from larger powers. The Blue Pacific approach challenges this assumption by highlighting that Pacific governments actively shape their own political, economical, and security agendas. And the last one is the interpretation of China's engagement through Pacific priorities. So in recent years, the rise in presence of China in the Pacific is often framed or portrayed by the mainstream media or the Western powers as a strategic threat. However, many Pacific Island leaders have viewed China differently. China is viewed by Pacific Island leaders as an additional development partner that can contribute to infrastructure, trade, and investment. According to Kabutaulaka, Pacific Island countries operate within a complex regional order where their relationship with traditional partners remains significant. But new actors such as China create opportunities to diversify partnership. So in this context, Pacific Island leader states attempt to filter external engagement through their own development and security priorities rather than adapting the threat perception promoted by outside powers. With that being said, I will conclude by saying that the strength of the Blue Pacific narrative lies in its ability to unite Pacific Island countries around a shared regional identity while asserting their sovereignty in international affairs. With that being said, that concludes our answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you through Joe Simone for sharing with us your answer to the question that was assigned to the group 5. Now let's listen to group 2. Group 2 will be represented by Tanika and Wedfine. Group 2, the virtual microphone is yours. Please go ahead.
So Wedfine and I will be answering the question that was assigned to us. And the question reads, ODA notes that China's infrastructure projects in PNG have prompted counter-initiatives from Western powers. How should PNG balance these competing offers to maintain autonomy in national development? Before we answer the question, I'll give some background information about the statement so we can all understand better. So for everyone's reference, the answer that we're going to give was derived from one of the required readings, China Alternative, that is chapter 13 specifically. So the Pacific region has become a focal point of strategic competition with Papua New Guinea at the center, and major powers seek influence, and infrastructure development has emerged as a key arena for rivalry. So ODOD highlights that Chinese-funded infrastructure projects in Papua New Guinea, such as roads, ports, and public facilities, have prompted counter-initiatives from Western powers, notably Australia and the United States. So these responses often take the form of aid packages, security cooperation, and alternative development financing, all designed to ensure that Papua New Guinea does not become overly dependent on China's investment. Papua New Guinea faces both opportunities and risks in this environment. On one hand, competition among external powers can bring much needed resources, technology, and investment. And on the other hand, it risks entangling our nation in geopolitical rivalries that may compromise its sovereignty. So Papua New Guinea must balance these partnerships strategically by diversifying its external relationships and maintaining a clear national development agenda. PNG can maximize benefits while safeguarding its autonomy, and this means we set clear priorities for infrastructure or negotiate terms carefully to avoid debt traps or over-reliance on any single partner. And we can leverage competition to secure better deals while ensuring projects align with our nation's long-term vision. In the Pacific, infrastructure has become more than just roads, ports, and power grids. It's a strategic tool of influence where competing powers use development projects to extend their reach and shape political alignments. So I'll leave it over to Wedfine to answer that question.
Thank you, Tanika. To answer our question, how should PNG balance these competing offers to maintain its autonomy in national development? We have identified five ways in which it can maintain its autonomy. The first one being promoting development over diplomacy. According to the National 2026, the Chinese ambassador, Yang Wang, stated that, and I quote, "It is with nothing. Chinese help build a solid foundation for local economic and solid development," end of quote. So by leveraging the competition between China and Western donors, it secures better development outcomes. And by comparing offers and negotiating carefully, PNG can secure more favorable lending terms, better infrastructure funding, and higher quality development projects aligned with national priorities of the country. The second one is strengthening its domestic governance and regulatory systems. The government must strengthen its investment regulations and policy. Many risks are associated with foreign investments, including corruption, environmental damage, and poor project implementation, which often rise from weak oversight rather than the nationality of the investors. By improving transparency, regulations, and enforcement mechanisms, it would allow PNG to manage foreign-funded projects more effectively and protect its national interests. For instance, stabilizing PNG's custom with tax policies. The third one being diversifying partners. PNG should diversify its development partners or its flexibility by working with multiple actors, including China, Australia, and multilateral institutions such as the Asian Development Bank, which can help reduce dependency on a single partner and in turn increase PNG's bargaining power in negotiations. The fourth one, long-term project. The government must or should ensure that all infrastructure projects support long-term national development goals. The project should contribute to the economy's growth, infrastructure improvement, and environmental sustainability, rather than serving only foreign strategic interests. And the final one, strengthening transparency. PNG must eradicate corruption measures by developing
strong measures of accountability. Without these strong accountability systems, competition between foreign powers could encourage corruption or lead to poorly planned investments that undermine PNG's development objectives. Thank you, and that's the end of our presentation.
All right, thank you, Thomas, Group 2 and your representatives, Tanika and Redfine, for sharing with us your answer to the question. If you have any questions or comments for our presenters this morning, please make sure you share in our discussion forum for this week so we can expand the discussion. The second last group will be Group 3, and Group 3 is represented by Emma and Gregory. Emma and Gregory, please go ahead. Virtual microphone is yours. And we'll conclude with Group 1, Brittany and Muriel.
Good morning, Mr. Yagura and class. So for this presentation, we were given the question, Zhang analyzes China's foreign aid practices in the Pacific. To what extent is China's foreign aid strategy aligned with broader geopolitical interest, and how does it challenge the traditional donors in the region? So specifically, we will look at the two questions. To what extent does China's foreign aid policy, foreign aid strategy align with its broader geopolitical interest, and how does it challenge traditional donors in the region? So China has become an increasingly important development partner for Pacific Island countries, and these forms of aid, such as trade and investment, they help to strengthen China's economic and diplomatic relationships with countries such as Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Tonga. So moving on to the first question, what extent does China's foreign aid strategy align with its broader geopolitical interests? China's foreign aid strategy is deeply aligned with its geopolitical interest. Economically, aid secures economic activities and natural resources, also through concessional loans and infrastructure projects, Belt and Road Initiative. The concessional loans are channeled through China Exim Bank and China's Development Bank. It also, The aid also comes through funding major infrastructural projects. For example, the APEC Summit infrastructure, the Ramuniko Cobalt project, or the MCC project. It also helps with scholarships and medical assistance, diplomatic competition, and soft power diplomacy. So for China's political interest, beyond economics, China's aid strategy reinforces political interest, and it raises sovereignty concerns, as aid can be used as leverage in domestic policy making. And it also fuels diplomatic competition, particularly with Taiwan, and contributes to image building. Also, some NGOs even perceive military ambitions behind these aids. And so together, these factors show that aid is not neutral, but it is a political instrument.
Moving on to the second part of the presentation is the role of the Belt and Road Initiative within the Pacific region. China provides an institutional framework for infrastructural investment in the Pacific. The Belt and Road project enhances China's ability to shape regional connectivity and economic flows.
However, there is a mixed reaction within the Pacific region based on personal experiences and knowledge. According to Jan 2022, stated that 76% of the Pacific scholars supported Chinese Belt and Road Initiative as it provides an opportunity for engagement and cooperation between China and the Pacific Island countries. However, most Pacific NGOs remain critical to Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. How does China's influence in the region challenges the traditional donor partners? China's growing influence in the region is viewed as a threat by Western powers. The region is caught in a geopolitical tension as China and the West compete to influence each Pacific Island country. Many Western scholars label Chinese loans as soft power diplomacy aimed at attracting low and middle income countries to fall into its debt trap diplomacy. Poor governance conditions make Chinese aid politically attractive for some governments. Chinese concessional loans and infrastructure project challenges traditional donors by offering alternative financing, sometimes with fewer political conditions, appealing to Pacific governments seeking rapid development. Therefore, this makes China as a friendly partner for Pacific Island countries to trade with. Lastly, China portrays itself as a development partner, funding major projects across the region through its Belt and Road Initiative. According to Duke and Dayan 2023, stated that China emerged as a key development partner in the Pacific, with Beijing playing a vital role as the region's second largest source of development finance. Moving on to the conclusion of this presentation, Chinese foreign aid strategy strongly aligns with its broader geopolitical ambitions. Chinese engagement has reshaped the development landscape in the Pacific region. Traditional donors must now operate in a competitive and multipolar aid environment. Finally, Pacific Island states play an active role in navigating and balancing these competing influences. I think that's all, and we have came to the end of our presentation, and these are our references.
Hey, thank you, Emma and Gregory. A very interesting presentation, similar to all your peers who have shared with us information relating to the assigned questions. I hope all of you have taken note of what has been shared with us, and you're learning new things about China and what China is doing in the region and in Papua New Guinea in particular. And you're now thinking about your own perspective of China. Is China a security threat or is China a development partner? Let's conclude with Group 1, Brittany and Muriel. Group 1, please go ahead, David. Your microphone is yours.
To do our presentation on topic 2, China as a security threat and PNG's perspective. Moving on to our question and statement. So, according to Matbob, economic activities involving Chinese traders have both benefits and risks for local communities. So our question is, how might reliance on Chinese businesses influence PNG's sovereignty and social cohesion? So for better understanding, I will define sovereignty and social cohesion. Sovereignty is a political Sovereignty is a political concept that refers to a dominant power or supreme authority. And that's from the Legal Information Institute of Cornell Law School. And social cohesion involves building shared values and communities of interpretation, reducing disparities in wealth and income, and generally enabling people to have a sense that they are engaged in a common enterprise, facing shared challenges, that they are members of the same community. To the economic benefits for local communities, Matbob notes that Chinese traders contribute to the economy by providing goods at lower prices and increased availability of products in towns and rural areas. That's why people prefer Chinese shops than local shops. And they create business activity and employment opportunities, especially in retail and small-scale trade. That's why Chinese shops provide employment opportunities for locals and stimulating competition in local markets, which can benefit from consumers.
All right, so to answer the question, despite the fact that there are benefits from Chinese traders where these help improve, or Chinese help improve access to goods and support local economic development, there are risks and impacts that they pose to Papua New Guinea's sovereignty and social cohesion. So according to Patrick Matbob's chapter, in chapter 15 that we took our answers from, on the ground tensions with Chinese traders in Papua New Guinea. It explains that Chinese business activities bring both benefits and significant risks into posed to Papua New Guinea. Yeah, so these risks directly affect Papua New Guinea's sovereignty and its ability to govern independently, and social cohesion. Yeah, that's the stability of relationships within communities. So without further ado, let's just look at the risks and impact on sovereignty. So to the risk on economic sovereignty, we have the first point, dominance in retail sectors. When this is when foreign traders control many small businesses, local entrepreneurs may struggle to compete. And the second is dependence on foreign capital and supply chains. So if the economy becomes too reliant on Chinese businesses or imports, PNG may lose some control over its domestic economic activities. And to the impacts on sovereignty, we have loss of policy and regulatory control. So according to Matbob, stated in chapter 15, Chinese firms often operate through state-to-state agreements. For example, the Ramonicol that bypass weak Papua New Guinea regulatory system. So this limits Papua New Guinea's ability to disproportionate like influence over economic decisions. The second is corruption undermines state authority. So in the chapter, he highlighted widespread bribery involving Chinese traders and Papua New Guinea officials, particularly in areas such as visas or work permits, tax enforcement, and business licenses. So this is when officials accept payments or they ignore rules, and the state loses its ability to govern impartially. Yeah. The third is legal risk through contract terms, where some Chinese linked agreements require Papua New Guinea to accept arbitration under Chinese law or with sovereign legal protections. This can further Papua New Guinea's institutional authority and long-term control over major projects. So that's for impacts, risk and impacts on sovereignty. And for impacts on social cohesion, we have local resentment on ethnic tensions. So according to Matbob, there was a strong public resentment towards the new Chinese migrants who are perceived as aggressive competitors who push out local businesses by operating long hours, selling cheap goods, and working outside Papua New Guinea social norms. The second is unfair competition and displacement of local businesses. And Chinese traders' ability to source cheap goods, import their own labor, and cooperate with fewer social obligations like Papua New Guinea Wantok obligations creates perception that locals cannot compete fairly, and this fosters anger and social divisions between locals and the Chinese traders. Crime, insecurity, and separation. So because there are frequent robbery targets, Chinese traders use heavy security, metal bars and CCTVs. Like you see, it's evident if you walk into the shops in every Chinese shop. This physical separation depends social distance and mistrust between the communities. That's between Chinese and the the community members, which they have their let's say their little retail shops in which they're established at. Corruption normalizes lawlessness. So in Matbob's elaboration, bribery, it shows how bribery by some Chinese traders and some Papua New Guinea officials or government officials who are willing to accept those bribes. It undermines public perceptions of fairness when citizens see foreigners bypassing laws through payments, confidence in state institutions, and declines, or it weakens social solidarity. And the last is cultural misunderstanding and lack of integration. So new Chinese migrants often live in enclaved, face language barriers, and have little long-term commitment to Papua New Guinean society. And this prevents meaningful interaction with locals and reinforces stereotypes on both sides. So to conclude, without strict local institutions, reliance on Chinese businesses can weaken Papua New Guinea's ability to be economically independent and widen social divisions. And overall, Chinese can provide economic opportunities and infrastructure. However, this may lead to economic dependence, social tension, and concerns about national control over local industries. Yes. And with that, that's the end of our presentation, and these are references. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Muriel and Brittany. Thank you very much for adding to the discussion. And I hope all of you have learned something from their presentation. So that is our final group. They're representing Group 1, and we'll stop here. We thank everyone for their time and for sharing with us their respective answers to the assigned questions for each group. I'll leave you with this photo. I'll leave you with this photo. My concluding remarks. The last 2 weeks we've talked about China and whether or not we should consider China as a security threat as the narrative framed by the Western powers or traditional partners. We should see China more as a development partner, someone we can work with to help us address our problems and our needs in our communities around the country. So this is a picture from Goroka, the Komiufa Junkao Center. It's an industrial park, and you can see these are pictures of goats. The goats are chewing the Junkao grass, And on the other side, you have the pigs on this side, and then you have the ducks at the back. And on the other side of the opposite side, the house on the hill, and then down, that's the new instant coffee factory. So this is the site where the Chinese are doing research on Junkao grass, and the grass is actually being used to not only grow mushrooms in tubes or containers, but they're also using the grass to feed livestock, and they're also introducing, or they already introduced upland rice. So the research project that we undertook was funded by ANU, and I worked with Dr. Denghua Zhang. So we wanted to find out more about this project and the mushroom grass itself and how the grass contributed to poverty alleviation and development in the community. And we conducted 3 focus group discussions with farmers, around close to 10 individual interviews with farmers, and then Goroka town residents. We interviewed around 13, 14 individual interviews. So we did quantitative interviews, or qualitative interviews with those people directly involved in the mushroom project, the Jiangkao or Junshao. The Chinese pronounce it as Junshao. So we did interviews to find out the perception of farmers about the project itself and how it has changed their lives and helped them on a day-to-day basis, their needs and wants. So we got really interesting answers from the farmers. I want to share with you. We'll be publishing the answers soon, so all of you can get a copy of our journal article publication and have a read through and see what the farmers in Goroka, Eastern Island shared with us. But that is just to show that China at the community level is also fully engaged in terms of agriculture. So we've talked about the economy, them dominating the business scene in the different towns and cities around PNG, and then infrastructure, building roads. But in terms of agriculture, investing in agriculture, these are a demonstration of what they're doing at the community level. So you have all these mushroom farmers now engaging in planting mushrooms, and they're selling mushrooms for 10 kina, 11 kina, 15 kina per bag in Goroka town and in the market. So when you move around Goroka, you'll see them carrying the mushrooms around, the mobile sellers or those stationed in the market and selling there. So that's what China is doing at the community level. So something for us to consider and think about and continue our debate on whether or not China is a security threat or it's a development partner. So that brings us to the end of our 2 weeks discussion on the theme China is a security threat, our case study on China, and our next case study will be on cybersecurity and digital changes in PNG. So that we will start in week 7, and week 8 we'll have seminars 5 and 6. So Tasol, thank you all for joining. That's the end of our session for today, and we'll meet again after next week in week 7. Next week we have the first submission of your policy review. So after next week we'll meet for the 5th seminar. So that's all. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the presenters and for the groups for working with the presenters to help share answers and continue the discussion, the debate on whether or not China is a security threat or a development partner.